Okay, hello boys, hello girls. Welcome to your first ever YouTube video for the study of history or geography. So today's topic is going to be scales of history. This is a very simple topic, and I am going to explain some previous things so you can have it really clear. But do not worry, I will let you know once you have to start writing in your notebooks and what will be the activity that that I need you to do, please. But for now, just pay attention to this video, okay? You may have a big clue here on what we're going to be seeing today. As you can see over here, we have a picture of Moctezuma, then we have a picture of the city of Tenochtitlan, then we have a picture of the empire of the Mexicas, and finally we have a picture of Middle America, of Mesoamerica. So this has a lot to do with our topic of today, with scales of history. So what are the scales of history? Well, first we need to understand what is a scale. And scale, as we are going to see a lot in geography, has to do with size. But there are two types of scaling, and we're going to be working with both of them actually in geography. But now we're going to try to bring this to history. So there is one type of scaling that is a symmetrical scaling. This means that the properties are going to be maintained, that you're going to keep the same properties. For example, in a map, when you get a map and you scale it up, this means you make it bigger, you're going to basically have the same properties. You're going to still try to represent the same surface or the same coasts, I don't know. But the properties are going to be the same. Mainly, if you take this small map over here and you make it bigger, this is just scale it up, you're going to still have the same things. However, there is this type of scaling that is non-symmetrical. I don't want to call it asymmetrical, but it is certainly not symmetrical. And in this type of changing scales, properties are going to change, and this is what is very important. So over here you have a nice example, right? You have a molecule of oxygen and two molecules of hydrogen, but when they come together, they are not going to have the same properties. For example, both oxygen and hydrogen are gases in nature, but the molecule that you get from joining these three atoms is going to be water, and it is in a liquid state, most usually in nature. So this is a type of scaling. Why? Because we are changing the position, we're changing our point of view. We are changing the place in which we are standing to observe the phenomenon that we are watching. So this is a change of scale of observation. And this change in the scale of observation is not symmetrical because of this, because we have some properties changing. And it all depends on where you're standing, what you're going to be able to see. Right, so let me give you further examples. You don't have to copy this yet. I will let you know when, okay? So in this first stage, what you have are atoms, right? But when you join the atoms, what you're going to have are molecules. What is very important here is that it is not just joining atoms at random. You have some way of organizing these atoms, right? For example, in here, the atoms of hydrogen have 104 or 102, if I remember correctly, degrees of separation between each other. That is why it looks like a Mickey Mouse, right? But this is very important because this is giving water some properties. But what happens if you join a lot of molecules together, and not only of water molecules, but other types of molecules? Well, you get a pretty much complex a much more complex structure. You get a much more complex molecule. For example, over here you have some amino acids, right? So what happens if you start to organize more and more of these complex molecules? Well, you're going to have a cell. And over here, perhaps this is the best example of all, because up to this point, you have molecules, but in this point, you have life. So life is a new property that is going to be emerging from the organization of these molecules. And it is obviously not the same studying molecules as studying life itself, right? But what do you have if you start joining and organizing a bunch of cells? Well, you're going to have tissues, right? And if you organize tissues, what you get are organs. And if you organize organs, you get systems, right? Like your circulatory system. And if you get a bunch of systems working together in an organized way, what you're going to get is an individual. And starting here, this is going to be important for history, right? From all of these things that we have seen for history, things start to matter at this point. We're going to see by the end of this presentation that some guy named David Christian is trying to say that actually it is important starting with the atom, but I am going to tell you my opinion on that later. So what happens if we join a bunch of people working together in organized ways? Well, we have societies, right? And over here, history really wants to know about this thing that is emerging here, right? And finally, we get to the most complex thing that exists in the whole universe, that is culture, right? Because from the interaction of all these elements, I mean, including other types of individuals, such as trees, such as other animals, like the interaction between the ecosystem and society and everything, this is going to give us culture. So this is a bunch of things that are part of culture: beliefs, language, customs, rituals, behavior, faith, religion, food, art, drama, music, attitudes. All these change depending on your society, because all of these are a product of the interaction of society. So this is quite very complex. There was this guy that is actually the father of let's say the objective point of view of science, positivism. His name was he was the teacher of Emil Durkheim. Give me a second, I will remember just now. His name was Comte, Augusto Comte. Yes, he was a French guy, right? So that's why the name is funny. It would be written as Augusto Comte, right? And he used to say it is much more easier to start studying or to study atoms and other subatomic elements and all the subatomic particles than studying a society. I mean, at least atoms behave in a certain way. In society, you never know, right? And you do not only have one thing that you know how does it behave, but you have a bunch of these individuals behaving in unpredictable ways, right? So for him, and I do agree, it is much more difficult trying to understand a society than trying to understand an atom or a molecule or even a cell, right? It is much more complex. But as you can see, that is because we are the result of all these previous levels, right? Okay, so now you should start copying in your notebooks. This is the first level that is going to be relevant for history. Like if you are talking about all these scales, if you are talking about all these sizes that we can look at, and if you remember the definition of history that we are working with, remember that history, according to Mark Bloch, is the science that studies men throughout time, the doing of men throughout time. Well, we require man first, right? We require a person. We cannot start over here with the cell. We require people. So this is the first scale of history, the smallest thing that you can observe. And this is a biography. In a biography, all you have to do is present the life of an individual. And this can be any type of individuals. You can even write your own autobiography, and perhaps someone is going to read it. Of course, you do expect to have a lot more success if you are writing the biography of someone very famous as Napoleon or perhaps Nefertiti, right? But you can try. I mean, any person can write his or her own autobiography. And well, this is a way of studying history. Not the most scientific way, because Well, we're going to be seeing that later. In here, we're not explaining anything, and that is a big deal in actually talking about science. What are you explaining, right? But it is valid. You can do history at this scale, and it is valid. Biography. Then we have a monograph. For example, you have this example here. You can write a book on World War II. And a monograph is about presenting. Again, over here, all you're doing is presenting one topic. So you try to be exhaustive. You try to really say everything there is to say about this topic. But it is just about presenting the topic. You are not doing anything else than presenting a topic. But it is also a nice, simple way of doing history. I mean, you can do this. Then we have local history. Actually, if you look to the left, this book was written by a friend of mine, Tomás Jalpa. And you have other example to the right about Iztapalapa, right? So Tomás Jalpa is actually someone that lives in Xochimilco, and he was born in Xochimilco and he lives in Xochimilco. So he writes the local history of towns of Xochimilco, right? And that is very common. People that live in some towns and are really, really proud of those towns write the history of those towns. So they usually aren't historians. In this case, Tomás Jalpa is a historian. In many cases, they are not. They are just people that like history and, they would like other people to know the history of his town or her town. But again, over here, all you're doing is presenting the history of one place. Yes, so let's just recall what we have seen. Biography is presenting the life of one person, and you should try to write these definitions, okay? Biography, presenting the life of one person. A monograph, presenting one topic in an extensive way, trying to be exhaustive, right? Local, and over here we could also include regional, right? As we have seen in geography, if you find several places that share something, for example, history, you can write regional history, but it doesn't change a lot, and it is just about presenting the history of a certain place or region, if you would like to say it. But again, you're just presenting something. It doesn't change a lot from the monograph, right? Because you could say that the topic is this place, right? But usually we distinguish them in history, and we just say, that's the local history of Iztapalapa or from Xochimilco, right? Here is where it starts to get actually interesting for history. And this is the type of history that we are going to be studying. Global history. Global history is about solving a problem, trying to explain something. So over here, things change, right? Because in all the other skills that we have seen, what we are doing is just presenting something, presenting a topic, presenting a place, presenting the life of a person. But over here, we do want to solve a problem. We have questions. So this is mainly what makes this very, very particular, that you start with a question. I have a doubt, and I am going to research that doubt until I have a proposal, until I have an answer that I may give to people. So over here you have a very nice example. I love this example. I always explain global history with this example. And it is The Royal Touch, right? This was a book written by Mark Bloch. Do you know Mark Bloch? He's our great hero. He's the one that thought the definition of history that we are working with. And what is the Royal Touch? The Royal Touch was a custom in the Middle Ages in which both in France and England, people believed that kings could heal them just by touching them. So this was very particular for Mark Bloch, right? We could imagine just being in the archives and suddenly seeing these files that say, and he went to the king to be healed, and the king just touched him and he was healed, right? And we can imagine Mark Bloch asking his question, and the question would be something like this. What? What? How is it that the king is healing people just by touching them? And he's going to start to research this problem. He's going to start with this question: how is it that the people from France and the people from England believe that they can be healed just by being touched by the king? So he started to research a lot. It was very interesting. He got a lot into anthropology. He got he got a lot into the study of religious systems, into the study of how actually monarchy or leadership amongst societies is related to religion. And he came to this very nice conclusion. Well, by these years, in the Middle Ages, France and England are competing between them. They are the greatest powers of the West, of Europe. So they are competing to know who is the actual ruler of Europe, right? Because we're going to see this when we study the Middle Ages. There are actually some French people ruling over England, but they aren't actually French. They are Vikings that became French, that conquered England. So it was pretty complex. And of course, France didn't like this at all, because they used to be a very small part of their kingdom, but now they are the kings of one of the most important kingdoms there is. And now they are their competitors. This started, of course, with Count Roland, with Duke Roland, actually. But do not worry about that. We are going to study that later. The point here is that both France and England are going to be competing on who are the actual kings, who actually has the divine right to rule. Because remember that in this point, that is a discussion. You need to be chosen by God in order to become a king. You are like an emissary of God in earth. You are not the Pope, of course, but you are chosen by God to rule over people. So that is precisely the answer that he was able to get. People believed that kings could heal them because they were chosen by God. To rule, yes, not to heal, but a proof that they were chosen to rule was that they were actually able to heal people. And also, they would heal people of very particular diseases, of very particular illnesses. And those are illnesses that actually don't do anything to the human body. Like, you cannot die of those diseases. So if you start feeling bad, you just go to the king, he touches you, and you don't die. But, well, you weren't going to die anyway, because those diseases aren't deathly. But that was the very nice explanation that he was able to get. Mark Bloch was able to find this relation between the way in which England and France are competing for the authority of being kings, and how this institution of the royal touch is actually helping them to become legitimate rulers, because they are saying, I am chosen by God, and thus I can heal people. So this is the type of history that we are going to be using. Global history. Why? Because we are going to be researching. History is about research, and you cannot do research and you cannot do science if you don't ask yourself some questions. As we said the other class, you don't have to start with the question. Perhaps you already have the data and you don't know what's the question for that data, right? But it is a very nice exercise, and we really cannot skip this step. We are going to end up asking a question in any point of our research. Perhaps we don't start with a question, but we are going to end up asking a question anyway in some point. Actually, there is this very nice method of knowledge that is called abduction, and in abduction we ask the question of how can I explain this data? Like, I don't get the data based on the question. I have the data, but how can I explain the data? We're going to see that a bit later, but the point here is you are eventually going to end up asking a question, and that is what makes science, right? So as we are seeing history as a science this trimester, we're going to be asking some questions, and that is going to be making global history. The next scale of history is world history. So this is very particular, and actually your book is World History, Great Civilizations, right? That's the title. We're going to forget this thing about the great civilization. I mean, we're going to see that actually civilization is a pretty racist word that we shouldn't be using anymore, because that's a way of saying some of us are civilized and some are barbarians or savages. And we're not going to be using that word anymore, but the point here, world history, well, it's pretty self-explanatory, right? World history is attempting to present, over here, again, we have that problem. We're not trying to explain anything. We're trying to present the world, the history of the world. What is the problem here? This has two problems. The first one, as I have already said, that you're not trying to explain anything. You're just presenting the history of the world. And the second problem is that, of course, this history of the world is seen by the eyes of the West, right? By the eyes of Europe and the eyes of the United States. That is actually why it is called great civilizations, because they are trying to explain you those societies that are alike Europe, that are like the United States. But what about all those societies that are nothing alike Europe or the United States, like tribes? Tribes are nothing alike the United States or Europe. So they are leaving all those things behind, right? They are trying to exclude them from history. So that's the big problem with world history. World history is always as seen by the West, and the West is basically Europe and the United States. So what are we going to do during this course? Well, we're going to be using global history. So this is, we're going to be trying to explain things, but at a world history level. So we're going to try to explain things in a very broad sense. We're going to be explaining things of Mesopotamia. We're going to explain things about Egypt. We're going to explain things about Greece and Rome and the Middle Ages, and finally about the modern era that starts with the discovery of America, of course. So we are taking the fourth approach, that is the problem history or global history. They are synonyms. You may mean problem or global history, and it is the same, in order to study world history. But for your notebook, for the definitions that you have to write, just remember to write global history is about solving a problem, starting with a question, with a research question, and trying to do all the research required to solve it. And world history is basically, and you should write it, a presentation of the history of several places of the world as seen by the West. The West, in Spanish, remember, Occidente, and Occidente is basically Europe and the United States, right? We are Western societies too, but of course they don't see us as such. And finally, big history. I'm going to actually ask you to watch a video on what is big history, but I just want you to have something into consideration. Like, let's go over here. And let me ask you a question. If I want to know something about the French Revolution, do I require to know how were the atoms created in the Big Bang? Do I require to understand how did the atoms emerge during the Big Bang? Is that really relevant for my research about the French Revolution? Well, let me give you my answer. Of course not. We need to be very, very careful with that, because perhaps it seems very interesting, but that's just Bill Gates trying to win some money, right? I was actually invited at some point to join a research group on big history at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and I rejected this offer because, well, for me this is just propaganda, right? This is not science at all. As they know that I am interested in the study of thermodynamics and chaos theory in order to explain history, they told me, oh, come with us and work with us in this big history project. But I told them, no, thank you. I mean, big history is just clowning. But okay, you can formulate your own hypothesis, and you can tell me if you actually think that you require to know what how were atoms created in the Big Bang in order to explain the French Revolution. Because, I mean, it is much more interesting to understand how societies work in order to understand the French Revolution than understanding how atoms work in order to explain the French Revolution. But you can tell me your opinion, okay, boys? So, what is going to be your homework? Of course, you have to watch this video on big history, but what I will ask you to do is one foldable, and I will include some videos or examples on foldables about all these scales of history: biography, monograph, local, global, world history, and big history. And what do you have to do? Of course, you should copy all these definitions in your notebook, but you should present me a foldable with all these scales of history and their definition. Okay, boys? So they are 6 scales. Yeah, 6 scales. So you will require a foldable that allows you to include 6 elements. But I will include some videos for you so you can use them in order to find out what is a foldable and how to do a foldable. And once you have done your foldable, please just take a picture and upload it to the homework that I will be opening. Okay, boys? So thank you very much, and that would be it. Bye.